It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice right here, right now. My name is Michael Evans, and I will be your host this morning. I appreciate you joining with us. I hope that a number of you are catching it live on our website. I see that some Lakewood is out there. I think that's in Lakewood, Washington. Buxton, Maine. That's a new one for us. Zanesville, Fort Wayne. I see folks out there, of course, from Marshfield and West Plains, of course. Huntington. Fort Walton Beach. I see Chicago out there, among others. Thanks very much for riding with us this morning. I appreciate your joining with us. We, as you know, broadcast this program live every morning from 8 to 10 Central. And then, of course, we move on to a rebroadcast from midnight to 2 a.m. on Rooster Radio, which is 99.3 Big Country 99, based out of Houston, Missouri. We have a listen line, which is beneficial to those of you that want to be able to basically catch the show at your own time and leisure. You can call that phone number at any time and get radio over your phone. Great idea. Easy to use. Simply dial 415-325-0725. That's 415-325-0725. I get a lot of email from you folks. I'm always happy to hear from you. You can write me directly at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. We're going to cover 4 separate topics this morning, and I want to talk a little bit about the theme of how things have kind of become out of control, if you will. We have a number of different respective areas that we are experiencing an overabundance, shall we say, of government overreach. Now, in general, we all know that it's, broadly propagated across the spectrum. We've got an enormous amount of federal abuse and, frankly, intervention in our day in and day out lives that's completely unnecessary. But I was reminded, I saw an article this morning about the Obamacare and the issue of, or I should say a comment, really, that was posted out there by an author in reference to Obamacare. And, I was a little disturbed by it because he was talking about the fact that, the media is now covering the fact that we made all these changes so that we could generate, 4 million people to be covered. And it really bothered me because my concern with that is, why is it that the media is talking about it in a negative fashion now? In other words, where were they when we needed them? Curiously, this journalistic community is now asking these questions, but they weren't there when we needed them. The truth is that they had an obligation to do the right thing by us back before this thing got out of control, and i.e. 2010, when they were first trying to pass it. Why didn't they expose the Democratic scam on America in reference to that? Why didn't they tell us about that? Because, they should have told us back then that it was going to be a problem. So I'm going to take a stab at answering him. And here's what I come up with. The answer is, where were you when it was all done? And why is the media only now doing this? All of this by the government to ensure 4.2 million people. Well, here's my response. We didn't do it to overhaul the entire system and change a $2.6 trillion industry to cover 4.2 million people. You, meaning the media, You, meaning Congress. You, meaning government. You overhauled this system. And you did so to ensure that 100% access was gained to 100% of Americans' lives, their finances, their health, their information, their medical history, and their data. And that you gained a foot in the door to the family. Because the goal, of course, of government is never to just simply have control of all that information. You want control of the actual family unit. You opened the door to propagandize 315 million Americans. You allowed that propaganda and participated actively in it. You conspired to drain Americans of their financial resources while you used them as guinea pigs for the pharma tyrants to test every heinous thing upon us while they enriched themselves. You, the media, you, Congress, you, the executive, you, the judiciary, you thought it was a good idea for Homeland Security to gather data through this system that the FBI and the NSA couldn't get because of constitutional prohibitions. You thought it was a good idea for the IRS to be put in charge as the authoritative enforcer. You thought it would be neat to use taxpayer money to cover insurance companies for their losses. And worst of all, you thought that this would further your opinion that single-payer, universal, government-issued health care would finally become a reality if only those simpletons and the peasantry out there would accept the interim step of Obamacare. The truth is, you were the ones who betrayed us. Our second topic is going to be the not the DOJ. Our second topic this morning is going to be the issue of how we have, for all intents and purposes, and my computer is just having fits and kittens over here. I am completely out of memory. How all three branches of the government are currently colluding in this tyranny. In other words, we have the courts approving of what the Congress and the executive are doing. We have the Congress, who is powerless in the face of an executive overreach to slow down or stop it. We have an executive which is completely and obviously out of control and encouraging non-authorized, unaccountable, nameless, faceless, illegal agencies to abuse Americans. Our third segment will be the EPA, the ATF, and the DHS. Three of these representative agencies. And what happens when these agencies run amok? And we're going to use specific stories to talk about that. And then our fourth segment will be Bill Gates and how he's defending his investment in Common Core. You see, Bill Gates believes that he knows better than you what's necessary. Not for the country, not what's in the best interest of America, not what's in the best interest of your children's educational needs, nor the family unit. He thinks he knows what's best for business, so that automatons and robotic individuals can be created. Not that they have the intelligence and the creativity that Americans and people around the world are born with and bred with and given by their Creator to improve themselves, to seek, to learn, to educate those around them and themselves. Not to strive to be better, just to maybe make sure that they can read a manual, push the right buttons. The truth is, when people like Gates and many others in his ilk, and I include Soros in that, and the Koch brothers, and all of these multi-zillionaire groups and individuals, they get tired, quite frankly, of playing in business. They've conquered business. They've manipulated the system to its maximum stretch. They've pushed the edges of the envelope as far as it can be pushed. And now that they've grown bored with the child's play of industry and business and buying and selling a Congress, they apply their resources, which are formidable, They apply their contacts and those that they've bought and paid for in legislative positions to mold a world in the shape that they believe it should be molded. With all due respect, I don't think I want Bill Gates determining what's in the best interest of me, nor my family, nor my children. I don't want him determining what's in the best interest of our nation. You didn't elect him. I didn't elect him. So how is it that he gets to have a stranglehold in the determination of what's in the best interests of our children? I thought so. So let's just talk about this Obamacare thing for a moment. You know, Curl asks, and he's the author of this, it's Joseph Curl in the Washington Times. And I'm not pointing my finger at him, you know, in a persecutorial manner. I am pointing my finger at the media in general, the mainstream media, and the six companies that basically, for all intents and purposes, control everything that you see and read and hear and learn and educate yourself with and your family. And he asked the question, we overhauled U.S. health care to insure 4.2 million people? He starts out with the number bounced around for years, 46 million. Obama said in August of 2009, I don't have to explain to you that nearly 46 million Americans don't have health insurance coverage today. In the wealthiest nation on earth, 46 million of our fellow citizens have no coverage. And to that opening gambit, I reply, well, with all due respect, you knew that 46 million was not a fair and accurate number back then. Why didn't you dispute it? Why didn't you point out the fact that 12 million of those were illegal aliens in the first place? Why didn't you dispute the fact that a good significant portion of those people didn't actually want insurance? That they were younger individuals within the country who felt that insurance wasn't necessary for them because they were young and they were invincible, indestructible. Why didn't you mention that at least 1 million of those people are individuals in the country who have determined that they don't really need health insurance, that they're willing to go it alone and pay for what they need as, when, and if, and where they need it? Why didn't you point out that at some point in time, it was inappropriate to force an individual single man to purchase maternity coverage and well baby care? The truth of the matter is, you had years, the media, to expose the fraud of what this really was. You had years to point out the fact that they were building a data hub that would be utilized as a major superhighway to redistribute the knowledge and the education, the information, the finances, the medical research, the medical information, the medical history of every single American. You had years to point out that the real purpose behind all of this was not so that we could cover 4.46 million people, but that the government would have a touch point, a touchstone point in every single individual human being on the continental United States and its territories. That was the real goal. It had nothing to do with covering 4.6 million or 46 million people. Obama could not care less. Congress could not care less about 46 million Americans. They're collateral. Damage when necessary. The truth of this is that you all had plenty of time to educate and inform the American people. Your job should have been to expose this for the fraud that it was. And you failed miserably. And now we've revamped our entire healthcare system. We've given the Obama administration and any subsequent administrations, irrespective of what kind of tyrannical ends they have, a complete and utter chain connected permanently in the lives of every American. A series of reins, an ability to grasp a hold of any individual because all of us will touch the healthcare system at some point in our lives, whether at birth or whether through injury or whether through sickness or whether through accident. All of us have to be in contact with a health system. And you allowed it. The truth is that only 4.2 million have signed up. But we already know that 6.5 million lost their insurance. So the obvious question is, if we've only covered 4.2 and we knocked 6 out of the game, we're at a net loss of some 2-point-some-odd million people. Even under the best scenario that the Obama administration can muster of hitting a 5 million target, we've knocked 1.5 million people out of insurance, adding them to the alleged number of 46 million that originally began with, which is 47.5 million. Now, I ask you to justify for me how any of that makes sense. I ask you to draw us a rational, conceptual idea of what the benefit is of taking 47.5 million Americans and placing them behind the 8 ball and simultaneously enslaving, and I do mean that, the other 260 million Americans It's completely, utterly absurd. The truth is, this is nothing more than another step, and a major one, admittedly, in the overall principle of expanding and extending the federal government's reach into every aspect of our daily lives. That was not what we envisioned as a nation. That was not the principle under which this nation was designed, built, geared. The truth is that all of these things point to one thing: a complete level of despotism in our government. I'm reminded of Thomas Jefferson and a statement he made, which was that, quote, an elective despotism was not the government we fought for, but one which should not only be founded on true free principles, but in which the powers of government should be so divided and balanced among general bodies of magistracy as that no one could transcend their legal limits without effectually being checked and restrained by the others. You show me where the check and the restraint is. It surely is not on the side of the courts, and it surely is not on the side of Congress. We have a system which was passed by one half of an already corrupt duopoly system. Does that mean that the Republicans represented America? Heck no. It means that they failed to protect us. It means they failed to educate us because they live in some little bubble where they thought, you know, this isn't a good thing, but ultimately we'll be safe from it ourselves. And let me tell you, it'll give us so much fodder, we'll win back the House and the Senate. That's all they really care about. Do you think they really care about you? Hardly. The sad truth is that all of this points to one thing: a federal government intent on usurping and placing states as figureheads, if at best, if even that, where the federal government determines the rules and administrative agencies run the day. They rule the roost. Like a group of drill sergeants, they march around from barracks to barracks, telling the raw recruits what to do, with painful results for those who fail to follow. I'm disgusted by what I see going on around us. And I don't understand why America does not rise up and defend itself against a clear and present danger to the very republic that has given us the right to sit here and speak out. Not that government gave us those rights, but they were outlined for us, and we were educated in a time when education mattered to the true extent of the value of those liberties and freedoms, and our responsibility to protect and defend them. Excuse me. We failed as a nation, as individuals, as watchdogs of our republic. We collectively have failed. And now we've reached a point in which it's unlikely that we'll be able to resolve this in a peaceful manner. You get the government, ladies and gentlemen, that you ask for. You get the government that you allow. And the one we've gotten is certainly not in our best interest. It is now in a position to become our master. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle the second topic, which is when all three branches are colluding in tyranny. And apparently, no one who is intellectually honest, no one who's cognizant of the rule of law can deny that that's the case. We'll be right back. If you wouldn't mind, we'd appreciate it if you would make sure that you work with our sponsors, because these are the folks that keep us on the air every day, including our friends over at the law offices of Jason Henry. If you have an opportunity to, and you are dealing with a legal matter that needs attendance, you can contact him at 417-256-4100. It's 417-256-4100. Also, our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, you can reach them on the Court Square at at number 2 Court Square. You can also call them at 417-257-1776. They have all kinds of cigars and tobacco and pipes and et cetera, and every accessory under the sun for your smoking needs. And then our friends over at Wits End Classic Barbershop, where you can get a great haircut for $10. Please swing by Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard and make sure that you visit them and tell the manager there, Bruce, that you heard about it on America's Voice Now. They're on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. It's Pizza Hut. And last but not least, our friends over at the Battery Station. Please make sure that you see those folks and patronize them, because those are the guys that keep us on the air. The Battery Station can be found at batterystation.com, and then you can also reach them at 417-257-7799. We'll be back in just a moment. Okay, we're back. You know, I'm reminded of a poem that was written by Yeats. I believe it was 1919. And he wrote it as he was talking about things that were happening in the United States and around the world, of course, after World War I. And it was called The Second Coming, and many of you may recognize a line or two from it. It starts out and it says, turning and turning, in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Turning and turning in a widening gyre. Think about this for a moment. When you have a storm and the swirl is spinning, we have reached a point in which, for all intents and purposes, folks, the center cannot hold. The center cannot hold because the centrifugal force is swirling out of control. We have a government that is colluding one with the other branches when their clear intent and directive was not to act as voices supporting tyranny within the other, but to be separate. Their goal was supposed to be that they would act as a watchdog, one over the other. That was the intent. Alexander Hamilton said, "The true principle of government is this: make the system complete in its structure, give a perfect proportion and balance to its parts, and the powers you give will never affect your security." But that's not been the case. He was assuming, falsely, that men would be honorable, that men would have integrity. That was anything but the truth. He was hoping that we would have men of honor who would do the right things, not based on their own personal benefit or based on their own personal aggrandizement or their own personal fortunes or wealth, but based on what was right for the nation. And from time to time, I'm sure we have. But I believe that those days are long over. The FISA Court colludes with federal surveillance programs. The court was put in place as an example to ensure that the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and these agencies were not abusing their authority and their power. But how can we believe that to be the case when every single request that has been submitted to them, they have approved. Not a single one have they said, stop right there, you've gone too far. The FBI issues thousands upon thousands upon thousands of orders to corporations, libraries, demanding records and silencing them under threat of prosecution and imprisonment if you're told that someone's looking into your personal information, your account. Ben Carson came out the other day and said that we are beginning to look like a Third Reich. America today is tantamount to Nazi Germany. Quote, a society where people are afraid to say what they actually believe. Government using tools to intimidate the population. The truth is, we've gone beyond political correctness, and we are living in a police state age. He called it a Gestapo age. I'm trying not to be inflammatory because the truth is, most people don't want to hear that. They look back on World War II and the horrors that were perpetrated there, and the minute you say fascism, they get all flustered. Well, we're not there. What you don't realize, ladies and gentlemen, is fascism, while practiced by the Nazis in that fashion, wasn't practiced by Mussolini in that fashion. Oh, yeah, sure, he killed a lot of his own people, but not in a wholesale slaughter manner like that. But then again, we're killing tens of thousands of Americans every day with law enforcement. Not every day, but let me clarify the number. We've killed more Americans since 2001, September 11th, than we've lost in Iraq through law enforcement. Now, if you're going to try and tell me that there's not something desperately wrong with that picture, then I don't know how you would define a police state. In other words, between the last 13 years, more Americans have died at the hands of law enforcement in our nation than died at the hands of terrorists and dissidents and insurgents and the people in Iraq. And in fact, not just there, but almost, the number is almost high enough to include Afghanistan. And it will shortly exceed it. Now, you can pretend it's not happening, but it doesn't mean it's not. You fear retribution because you've been taught to fear retribution. You fear speaking out because you've been taught to. But you see, what you don't realize is that when you are prohibited from speaking your mind, when you are prohibited from discussing what's going on around you, you are actually accomplishing the task on their behalf. Because without your speech, things degrade quicker. In fact, Carson had a great way of putting it. He said, the reason that is so horrible, talking about the silencing of free speech, is because the only way you have harmony and reach consensus is by talking. But if, in fact, people are afraid to talk, you never reach consensus. And instead, you grow further and further apart. And that's exactly what's happening, creating a horrible schism that will destroy our nation. He's right. What we have at this stage in the game, ladies and gentlemen, is nothing that resembles what we grew up believing was the nation in which we lived. Right now, the illegal alien population in the United States exceeds the total number of unemployed. Yep. That is stunning. We have more illegals than unemployed, which there may be some connection between the two, but I'll leave that to you to make up your own mind. You see, we have a court system which supported something like Obamacare when it was clearly an unconstitutional mandate. Ask any of our founders, would you approve of the principle and the idea that in order to retain your citizenship, in order to become a law-abiding citizen, you have to engage in commerce? I would think Alexander Hamilton probably would have pulled out a pistol and shot you right in the face. Right then, right there. Because the truth is, our founders didn't put up with this nonsense. In fact, if you look back historically, our founders were a pretty rough crowd. They had no problem having physical battles on the House and Senate floors. In fact, they fairly routinely got into fisticuffs. Not our meek and mild, well-mannered milquetoast lot. Because, of course, that was then and this is now. And gentlemen don't act that way. Well, I would beg to differ, because the truth is, these people were a lot better and a lot finer gentlemen than anyone that we can characterize or point to in Congress today. We have a court system which is acquiescing to tyranny because they fail over and over and over and over to even hear the case, much less rule against themselves. Because they are, in fact, in a conflict of interest position. They're sitting there trying to play Solomon when at some point in time they anticipate getting their half of the baby. They can't possibly be objective. They owe their allegiance to the very government that they're supposed to be defending and protecting the rest of us from. I don't understand why, for the most part, people refuse to see the obvious. Because you don't have to look very hard. I know the law and the practice of law and the legalese associated with it is difficult to understand for a lot of people. But it's made that way on purpose because their goal is to, like the old priests of old, make sure that none can interpret the sacred book without our interpretation inserted in the middle. Jefferson said to us, "Enlighten the people generally, and tyranny and oppressions of body and mind will vanish like spirits at the dawn of day." Where is our media? Where is our press? Working to enlighten the people. Working to chase the ghosts of tyranny and oppression and forcing them to vanish like spirits at the dawn of day. He later came out and said to us that all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. And yet, in many cases, the courts have actually silenced you by force, by coercion. Jefferson was prolific as a writer, and he's one of my favorites because he succinctly smacked the ball every single time. He understood and knew what to expect from tyrants. He was younger than most of the others, and for the most part, he looked at it in a different way than most of the others. And he was not afraid to speak his mind, even though, quite frankly, it could have meant his life. But as time went on, after the war was over and independence had been declared, he spent an enormous amount of time writing. And as a result of those writings, we have a unique viewpoint, a window, if you will, into the minds of what our founders thought, because many of the letters that he wrote were to others, and then, of course, he received many letters back. And a lot of that has been captured and retained. He certainly wasn't the only one, but he was one of the more prolific writers of the day. He expounded on this concept of knowledge, and he said, the most effectual means of preventing the perversion of power into tyranny is to illuminate, as far as practicable, the minds of the people at large, and more especially to give them knowledge of those facts which history exhibits, that possessed thereby of the experience of other ages and countries, they may be enabled to know ambition under all its shapes, and prompt to exert their natural powers to defeat its purposes. The court has an opportunity to educate, to illuminate. The media has an opportunity, far better even than government itself, to educate and illuminate. And has universally, and I do mean universally, failed. Willfully, intentionally, and with malice aforethought. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crime against humanity. I watched a show on Netflix the other day, which I thought was very impressive, and I would encourage you to watch it. It's called Flame and Citron. Flame, like flame in a fire. Citron, or Citron, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but Citron. It's the names of two men who lived at a time in history where their nation was under assault and had been invaded, and for all intents and purposes had been was under Nazi rule. And these two guys were partisans. And basically what happened is they went around finding those people that were either Nazi sympathizers and or direct Nazi contacts, and they removed them from society physically. They were so effective that their own government sought to have them stop because they were colluding with the Nazis themselves. They went after individuals who wrote and published pro-Nazi propaganda to try to manipulate and trick their own people. They went after those people that formed civilian corps, if you will. They called them, I've forgotten the name of that they called them, something corp or corps. But these were other Dutch individuals who, for all intents and purposes, turned on their own people. These were the ones who manned the roadblocks and so forth and so on. And when they found them, they removed them. And, it was an interesting movie. You got to pay attention to it. It's not the kind of thing you're going to take lightly. When you watch it, you've got to sit down because it's all in subtitles. It's spoken completely in Dutch, and so you have to read. But it is a worthwhile movie to see, because it shows that, you know, when you look at a single issue and you look at one instance of tyranny, or you look at one instance of government overreach, it can be construed as a mistake. That sometimes it's, good intentions gone awry. But when you, according to the words of Jefferson, when you see the very definition of tyranny, it is when all powers are gathered under one place. So, when the media, when the courts, when the Congress, when the executive, when they are all operating and colluding together, we are in tyranny. I'm going to leave you with one final quote from Jefferson because it pretty much sums it up. Single acts of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of the day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers too plainly prove a deliberate, systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. Let's say that for you one more time. A single act of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of a day, but a series of oppressions begun at a distinguished period and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers plainly proves a deliberate, systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. Whose word would you trust right now, right here? Would it be, I don't know, John Boehner? Would it be Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, or Mr. Jefferson? Would it be Chief Justice Roberts, Ginsburg, Alito, or Thomas Jefferson? Who really, truly has your best interest at heart, because he has no skin in this game? Any of the aforementioned current leaders or Thomas Jefferson? I rest my case, counselor. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle our third topic, which is the EPA, the ATF, and DHS, three agencies that have run completely amok, and we're going to talk about examples from each, including the EPA with wood stoves and this thing with this guy in Wyoming where they're fining him $75,000 a day for building a pond. We'll be right back. Please make sure, if you can, that you visit our sponsors, including Battery Station at batterystation.com batterystation.com 417-257-7799. And then, of course, our friends at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Tuesday night, children under 12 eat free. It's family night. And Tuesdays and Thursdays are reduced price lunch days. Jason Henry over at law offices of Jason Henry at 417-256-4100. And the Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop and Wits End Classic Barber Shop, both on the square in West Plains. And you can certainly do yourself and your family a lot of good by working with those folks. You can also see our friends survivalbypreparedness.com and at atlassurvivalshelters.com, two other organizations that are good friends of this program. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice Now.
It's It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America, and you are listening to America's Voice Now. You've joined us in our third segment out of four. We're halfway through our program this morning, and we're talking about the unbelievable levels of overreach that we're seeing in every facet of our lives. And a lot of that is engendered by these administrative agencies that don't have any justification for their existence, at least not legal or constitutional. They have no authority to exist other than that usurped and given to them by Congress, which we never subdelegated. We never gave Congress the authority to take our limited power of attorney handed to them in trust. And we never gave them the authority or the power to say, here, you can deal with this. These people who run these agencies, they are not elected. We don't know their names. We don't know their histories. We don't know their political viewpoints. We don't know their good and bad sides. We have no way to hold them accountable. We can't remove them from office if we don't like their actions. Ladies and gentlemen, that is tyranny. When your government, whom you have given elected support to, follows through and subdelegates that to individuals which you have not authorized or approved, well, I'm reminded again to give you this quote from Jefferson. An elective despotism was not the government we fought for, but one which should not only be founded on true free principles, but in which the powers of government should be so divided and balanced among general bodies of magistracy as that no one could transcend their legal limits without being effectually checked and restrained by the others. So I'm asking you now, who checks and restrains the EPA? Who checks and restrains the DHS, the ATF, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI? Who is going to restrain the DHS and ICE and Customs Enforcement from leaving the gates wide open with willful, malicious intent to allow unlimited abuse of our borders? Homeland Security, in an article out on LA Times this morning, or yesterday I should say, says Homeland Security is considering two major changes to ease deportations. So not only are we allowing them into the country, but when we do catch them by those overworked, unprotected, and unbacked Border Patrol agents who are actually trying to do their job, but then we don't deport them. And they're not only not deporting them, they're trying to figure out ways to loophole the law. Homeland Security officials are considering two major policy changes. Policy based on what? You don't have the authority to make policy because that policy parades about as law. And no agency constitutionally has the authorization to make law. If you don't believe it, go look it up in your Constitution. And no Congress has the authority to give our authority to someone else. They want to scale back deportations of immigrants in the country illegally to comply with President Obama's executive order for, quote, more humane enforcement efforts. So now you have an agency created by Congress that they had no permission or authority to create, who is now not taking the orders from Congress, but is in fact taking the orders from the executive, who has already shown us a predisposition to violate every tenet that the nation was built upon. He's actively engaging in lawless, unconstitutional behavior. And they're going to implement it. The first change that they're trying to do would be to ease or stop deportations of foreigners who have no criminal convictions other than immigration violations. Well, the truth is, it's not a question of whether or not you have another criminal conviction. If you violated our border and our sovereignty, you are a criminal, period. And until that gets resolved, nothing else happens. The other change that they're considering would scale back a controversial program that's known as Secure Communities. It allows the immigration authorities to request that immigrants in the country illegally be held in local jails until they can be transferred to federal facilities for deportation. Now, the problem there, of course, is that, one, many local jails don't have the wherewithal in small towns around the country to house these people. Secondarily, who's going to pay for it? Because it makes no sense for the federal government to pay small local jails. The truth is, this concept of deportation isn't really that difficult. I don't know why it has to take months and months and months of court. You can literally shuffle a few hundred of them through a day. Do you have any documentation that supports your existence here in the United States? No. End of case, deported. Next. Do you have any documentation that supports your authorized entry into the United States of America? No. Case closed. Next. Hey, listen, I can run through 1,000 of those a day. Is that due process? Absolutely. Justify your existence here, legally, or you're out. A second catch would result in a tattoo being placed upon them. A third attempt with that tattoo, open season. You see, our borders are sovereign. And if you look at the immigration policies of any of the South American countries or any, including Mexico, you'll find that they don't tolerate violators of their sovereignty. Cross their border and see what happens. First of all, if you're fortunate, you may survive the event. But only if you're fortunate. So I'm tired of hearing about how we need more humane treatment. What is humane about the individuals coming here and taking resources that we cannot use for our own needs? Our own starving children, our own unhealthy children, our own homeless, our own jobless. Where is it written that we must become the catch basin for the world to throw their chaff, not their wheat, because we discourage the wheat? This government doesn't want intelligent, legal immigrants. They don't want those who are educated, hardworking. They want those who will do as they're told. Frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, it's only a matter of time until this thing reaches the point of no return. Then over the weekend, it came out about a Wyoming welder who's facing a $75,000 a day fines from the EPA because he built a stock pond on his own 8-acre piece of property with state permits in hand authorizing the development of the pond. But you know what the EPA says? It doesn't really matter what your state agency said. You're violating the Clean Water Act, and you built a dam on a creek without a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. So you've got 30 days to remove it and make it all good again. And in addition to that, I mean, the time limits are, I'll have to find them for you in the article here, but let me just tell you what Johnson, who's the owner of this thing, says. He followed the state rules when he built the pond in 2012, and he has a letter from the Wyoming State Engineer's Office. The agency has since informed him, again, that his, quote, permit is in good standing and is entitled to be exercised exactly as permitted. He says he refuses to remove the pond, nor will he pay the EPA's fines. It's about a person's rights, he says. I have 3 little kids, and I'm not going to roll over and let the government tell me what I can do with my land. I followed the rules. Now, he's gotten his state lawmakers involved, and frankly, this sentence in the letter that they've sent to the EPA ought to alert the rest of you who have ignored my previous notices about what the EPA is trying to do under their new reinterpretation of the Clean Water Act. Here's what they said. Fairness and due process require the EPA base its compliance order on more than an assumption. Instead of treating Mr. Johnson as guilty until he proves his innocence by demonstrating his entitlement to the Clean Water Act Section 404, stock pond exemption, the EPA should make its case that a dam was built and that the Section 404 exemption does not apply. Now, the idea here, of course, is that when you are talking about government, we have the basic premise concept that you have to be proven that, or it has to be proven that you are guilty, not that you have to prove yourself innocent. I mean, where is it written? Where does it make sense? Where have you ever heard the premise or the concept that you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent? That's only in totalitarian, authoritarian, fascist dictatorships that you hear that. We've seen case after case after case after case just like this from the EPA. Moreover, the EPA is attempting to institute new rules that give them control over all water, public and private, across the nation. Anything that would ultimately touch navigable waters. The only thing that the Clean Water Act actually authorizes them to have jurisdiction over. And with all due respect, I don't think they've got jurisdiction to do anything because they don't have a right constitutionally, legally to exist. How many more times can I say that? The EPA has no right to exist. Do I want clean water? Of course I have to drink it. My children drink it. Do I want clean air? Of course I have to breathe it. My family has to breathe it. You have to breathe it. We all want that. But that is not what they're trying to accomplish here. What they're trying to accomplish here is the furtherance of their authority and their power. That's their goal. It has nothing to do with whether or not there's clean air and clean water. The truth is, this guy, I mean, he says that this goes a lot further than a pond. It's about a person's rights. And he's absolutely correct in that statement. I've not paid them a dime, nor will I, he says. I agree. The letter from these three representatives, two of them are senators and one's a House representative, say that they are troubled by Johnson's case. They shouldn't be stating that they're troubled. They should be writing a letter telling the EPA, you either justify these actions or your budget is completely wiped out until you do. Every penny is on hold and frozen. Instead, they throw a bunch of language in there. And I'll grant you the language is valuable, but I don't see it I don't see it as what it ought to be. You see, either Congress has authority over the EPA or the tail is now wagging the dog. Fairness and due process require the EPA base its compliance order on more than an assumption. The EPA has responded back and saying, we'll evaluate any additional information received and all of the facts regarding the case. If you trust that, you're a fool. I've got some oceanfront property in downtown Phoenix that is a perfect buy for you. The truth is that the EPA is now looking to expand their authority to include ponds, lakes, wetlands, creeks, man-made or natural, by the way. It would have any water that would have an effect on downstream navigable waters on both public and private land. So let's understand something. All water has an impact on downstream navigable water if you go far enough back. It's interesting that the EPA wants to follow the water, but nobody wants to follow the money. Why doesn't the same principle apply? My question is, if this is how the EPA is handling this given situation, and they want even more authority, more power, more abusive force to be placed at their disposal, how can we ever grant or approve that? The EPA is also going after wood stoves. I mean, guys, the wood stove thing is just insane. There's not a single wood stove manufactured in the nation right now that could pass the requirements associated with this new wood stove rating system. And, you know, I get it. Nobody in government has ever been out here. None of them have ever been here. They fly over here and they look down upon the peon and the peasantry and they feel sorry for us or whatever. But I can tell you that in the Midwest, in probably 30 out of the 50 states, wood is a significant source of fuel for family homes to be heated. And these people have unilaterally determined, in their infinite wisdom, sitting in their comfy homes supplied by electric or natural gas, that you don't have the right to do that. Get the hell out of here. That noise. Yesterday, and I'm going to wrap the segment with this, the ATF raided Ares Armor. Now, Ares Armor was a company that sold lower receivers in an unfinished format that you could basically get home, put onto a drill press, and within a few minutes have a lower that you would be able to make your own AR-15. But it wasn't considered a gun, so it didn't have to have a serial number, and they could ship it right to your house. This is by the ATF's own definition. They even got a restraining order the other day in court to prohibit the ATF from seizing their customer list. Now, given the fact that we've seen all of this overreach on the part of the ATF before, by the part of the IRS, and so forth and so on, why would anyone want to give the ATF or any federal agency their customer list? I mean, it's a prosecution persecution list. Well, they got the restraining order changed and they went in and raided them yesterday. I don't know whether they got the lists or not. I have no idea. I would hope that Ares would have been smart enough to wipe out everything they had. Because now the ATF will have a list of all the people that have bought a piece of metal that could potentially be made into a gun. And the next thing you'll see is now them racing about, knocking on doors. Where is it? We got to have it right now. There's 10 agents out here and you're completely surrounded. Guys, what part of it's over don't you get? What part of the party's done don't you get? We, as a republic, are finished, or we're going to go down fighting. The problem is I'm not seeing anybody stand up to fight. The problem is I see everyone frightened, silent, hushed. Shh, don't talk about that. They're listening. Well, you can sit silently. You can be acquiescent. You can do what the people did in Germany during the 30s when they saw it coming and still just refused to stand up and do the right thing. You can do that, but don't expect a different or unique result. Don't expect that because this is America, the results are going to be any different. In fact, you can expect it to be orders of magnitude worse. Why do I say that? Because, goodness gracious, if the Nazis only had the authority and the power and the documentation and the surveillance capabilities that these people have, we might all be speaking German right now. The truth is, we've lost our country. And the time is going to be very, very short for us to retain it and take it back. And November is not your answer, ladies and gentlemen. It's only one step in the process. Please don't tell me that you're waiting for November to come and see how that works out. Please don't tell me that. We're going to take a break. We'll return in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. All right. We return. So, how many of you are familiar with Common Core? I mean, we see that it's being implemented without I mean, it's being implemented as if we all agreed to allow it to be implemented. It's being pumped and promoted by people that, quite frankly, are only interested in their own nefarious ends. And I'm speaking specifically here about Bill Gates because he's defending his investment in Common Core in the millions of dollars that he's invested. And he does not do this as some sort of a charity event. He invested in Common Core because he expects to make an enormous amount of money for his efforts, whether that money goes to his nonprofit foundation or what have you. I mean, certainly he doesn't need the money personally. I get that. But he actually had the nerve to come out the other day and say, that scale is good for free market competition. But individual state regulatory capture is not good for competition. Well, with all due respect, I got to tell you, I don't think we're in any kind of a position where we should be trusting what he has to say. I mean, I really don't find his idea of Common Core to be in the best interest of anybody other than himself. Only a guy who built his fortune on the principles and the concepts of monopoly could think that a monopoly in education is a good thing, as long as, by the way, he's in control and involved in the monopoly. He actually came out and made a comment about how it, talking about capitalism and how it relates to that. Well, let me tell you something. Common Core isn't capitalistic and it's not market-driven. This is top-down from the government. And it is top-down totalitarianism and nothing short of that. And his defense of it reminds me of, Goebbels telling a big lie and telling it long enough and often enough that people begin to agree with it and believe it. And soon it's just accepted. Nobody questions it. The problem is that Mr. Gates can't buy himself integrity and honor no matter how much money he's got. And I got to tell you, these standards that he is promoting here are anything but state standards. If you've seen the documentation, if you've done your homework, if you have kids, or you even know kids, and you haven't done your homework, then you have been derelict in your duty. And I'm accusing you of participating and allowing Common Core to move forward. Not because you actively have supported it, but because you have refused to fight back against it, which is essentially the same thing. I have heard people say to me, and I've said it myself, the Muslims get very upset because when you say, well, the Muslims are a dangerous religion, they say, not all Muslims, that's not fair. You can't paint us all with the same brush. We're not all terrorists. It's a religion of peace. And I say, oh, really? Well, if it is, then why is it that you are not cleaning out your own mosques yourselves? Why is it that you don't take those individuals who you know to be a threat to the community and the city and the nation that you live in and eject them and shun them publicly? I mean, if you know them to be a danger, you have an obligation to do so. And I say the same thing to you. If you know that Common Core is not good for this nation, then you have an obligation to do what you can to fight against it. Does that mean taking time out from your busy day to show up at some kind of a meeting to educate your school board? Yes, it does. Is that convenient? No. Is it comfortable? No. Does it mean that you're going to have to make a few phone calls, get onto the internet, do some research, educate yourself about it, spend a few hours learning about it, and then go out there and speak out and get outside your comfort zone? Yes, that's exactly what it means. Have you done so? If your answer to me is no, then I say to you, you're not policing yourself. I had a discussion with Jack Spreaker the other day, and towards the end of the interview, we were talking about this issue with Muslims who refuse to out the other Muslims and say, aha, that's the guy. This guy's dangerous. I heard him talking about blowing up a car bomb in so-and-so city, and I'm exposing him. And I have the same thing. I say the same thing to police officers. If you are a senior officer and you see other officers, if you're a rookie and you see other officers who are sitting there abusing people and you refuse to speak out and testify against them and remove them from the force in order to protect us, then you have failed in your duty. And I say the same thing to a teacher. If you see Common Core and you don't speak out because you're afraid of losing your job to some little tyrannical Hitler mini-me on a school board somewhere, shame on you. If you're a union that's supporting this and you fail to expose it for what it is because you just want to make sure that your membership gets their comfy ride, shame on you. You're selling our youth down the road of treason and tyranny for your own personal advancement? Really? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the crux of the problem of our nation. That is why every aspect of the United States of America is on the brink of complete and utter collapse. That is why the center cannot hold. Because everybody's more interested in their own personal whatever. Satisfaction, safety, security, their own job. Don't make too much noise. By the time you come to the point where you have awakened and it is clear that you must make noise, it will be too late. And you will be the only one left standing in the room, looking about saying, "Who's with me?" Only to find that those who were with you are long gone. They preceded you, but you were too afraid or too ashamed to speak up. You risk nothing to fight Common Core. Maybe a little community ostracization. Maybe a little bit of discomfort because you've got to go out there and speak in front of a school board who you know is going to be aggressive and intimidating back to you. Why don't you sharpen your steel while you've got ample time to practice against non-professionals like school boards? Why don't you sharpen your blade, your rapier blade called your tongue, while you can do so in a place where it doesn't really matter? You know why? Because 9 out of 10 school board meetings, you're the only parent going to be there. The rest of your friends and neighbors and townsmen have completely abdicated their responsibility to our children. So you can go there and you can speak because nobody's going to see it if you mess up. They're all sitting at home watching, I don't know, The Bachelor, some other reality, mind-numbing experience. The Common Core standards were not developed for implementation as a unique standalone program state by state. These are standards that are pitched from and created by the Department of Education, which is a national organization. These are curriculum curriculums that are intended so that wherever that, and you know, they try and tell us, well, this is really so that if a kid moves here from, you know, Kansas or from Seattle or New York or Miami or and moves to St. Louis, that we know that that child is going to have this. Let me tell you something. The statistical numbers show that it's only like, 1 or 2% of all kids in school transfer from one state to another. That's bogus. But it's pitched as one of the leading reasons. Debunk it. Expose it. Well, I don't know much about this Common Core. I mean, I only know what I hear or I've heard on the radio or I've read an article. You know what? That's your fault. That's your fault for not having actually taken the time to go and educate yourself about it. You could have shown up at a meeting. You could have gone to any of the Mothers Against Common Core. You could have typed in Common Core, the negatives, the downsides of Common Core, into any browser, and you could have read from now until Easter. But you don't. You don't because, you're busy doing something else. What is that something else? I don't know. But whatever it isn't more important than the preservation and the restoration of our nation. It isn't more important than whether or not we're allowing our children to have propaganda drilled and pounded into their minds. If you're unhappy with the way our government is, and according to current polls out there, some 65% of Americans say we're headed in the wrong direction. Well, where the heck are the 65% who are saying, and Common Core is leading us there? I don't get it. Gates has the unmitigated goal, when pushed to discuss it, he expresses this frustration that Common Core is being opposed by pro-market people. He says, and so this thing, in terms of driving innovation, you'd think that sort of pro-capitalistic, market-driven people would be in favor of it. But somehow it's gotten to be controversial. I'll tell you why it's controversial. It's not pro-market, it's not pro-capitalistic, it's not market-driven. It's monopolistic, headed and led and run by Arne Duncan, who published, go look up Arne Duncan, A-R-N-E Duncan, and type in Little Black Book and see what pops up. This is a guy who distributed books, little pamphlets that he created on gay lifestyle to kids that were in junior high school. And incorporating into that, he was giving them lists of gay bars they should go to. These were kids in high school. Why are you giving them lists of gay bars to go to? I don't really care who you sleep with. I don't care how you do it. I don't care who you do it with. I'm saying to you that that's not the place of anyone to educate a kid like that, give them ideas. They had a whole segment in there about using your hand in someone's rear end up to the elbow. I think that's completely unnecessary. And this is the guy who's running our Department of Education under Obama, because his goal is to completely debase the entire damn country. This is about as pro-capitalistic and market-driven as Microsoft. And only from the mind of a monopolist could that kind of an argument come out. There's nothing pro-capitalist about this. This wasn't designed by the 50 states and then being implemented in each of the 50 states as a competitive experiment. This is top-down declaration. and it's propagandizing your child's malleable, moldable mind. What are you waiting for? It's beyond me that parents would sit around and gripe about this, but not take any action. Go to your doggone school board and rip their computers out of the wall and say, that's it, we're done. You're out. You're all fired. Hold a recall election. I don't care. Get them out of there. If they won't do your will, then find somebody who will and remove them physically if necessary. Is it not your town? Is it not your county? Is it not your community? Are they not your children? Somebody will come up and save us from ourselves. They'll ride up on a white horse and do the right thing by us every time. It's always happened in the past. We can't just take things into our own hands anymore. Apparently, you've already been indoctrinated. Folks, you got to realize this is going to come down to somebody having the brass to march in there to a school board, to defend and protect their property, to be able to see, if I say what needs to be said, I won't be on the air much longer. And that should suffice to help you understand that you have to recognize that the time is now for us to be able to put a stop to this. But I got to tell you, I'm sitting here, a voice in the wilderness, crying this stuff out every day, and I'm not seeing anybody doing anything other than posting up garbage on Facebook or sitting there. And I don't see new authors writing articles. I don't hear people out there in the streets. Why aren't there crowds of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parents at school board meetings with pitchforks and torches and buckets of tar as a representative figure, if nothing else, and saying, this is how much we're against it. If you continue in this folly, we will remove you from office. End it. End it yourselves. Did you know that your school board has the right, at least in the state of Missouri where I am, the school board has the right to say, nope. Now, you're going to lose funding. I get it. But you see, you should have stood up against this a long, long time ago. I've been to school board meetings where they said, well, it's being implemented now, but we're looking at it still. Why are you looking at it? You've completely abdicated your responsibility to the parents and the children in your community. If it's already being implemented, then why are you looking at it now? You should have looked at it before it was ever implemented, before it was ever instituted. How dare you use that as if that's some sort of a cloak that gives you excusability? We're studying it. What's there to study? Under Common Core, 3 times 4 equals 11. Our children are in enough trouble with the influence of everything else. Music, the influence of negative stereotypes, the influence of drugs, the prevalence of alcohol, the prevalence of activity and behavior that is dangerous. Now you're going to allow that to be compounded by a school system which, for all intents and purposes, encourages those negatives while refusing to stand up and deliver to them that which they need, which is a counterbalancing argument. And you at home, one, don't have the influence. Number two, you don't have the time. You're sitting there and you're going to try to influence them in the 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day you see them and counterbalance and counteract the 8 hours they gathered in school. Not to mention the other 10 hours they gather while they're watching television or surfing the internet or whatever it is that they're doing. It's a lost cause, folks. And I got to tell you, these are going to be our future leaders. Like the children of the 60s are now running the thing. You remember these people who were, all against the man? They've now become the man. And they are far worse than the man was back when he was or she was oppressing them. You ever hear the old phrase, today's freedom fighter is tomorrow's tyrant? That's your liberal progressive right there in a nutshell. And you're going to allow them to do this to your children. All right. That's your choice. But I pity you, and I pity this nation in 20 years. I pity this nation because if what they're taught in school today is what they're going to move forward with as their foundational basis for a worldview, the human race is done. Not just the United States of America. The human race. I got to tell you, you listen to people like Gates, you listen to people like Soros, you listen to every one of these sycophants in Congress who's supporting it, and all of them are committing a level of treason against our children that is incomprehensible. But, we've been long-suffering up until now. I see no reason to believe that we're ever going to change that. Not until the blood's flowing in the streets or, everybody's living in lockdown in their homes because, you've been told to. And maybe not even then. Well, good luck to you, America, because, I can only say that which some of you have said to me over the time, you say what I wanted to say, but I don't know how to say it. Well, you know what? Why don't you practice it? Why don't you get out there and practice it? Start on your mother. Start on your husband. Start on your father. Start on your wife. Hone your argument. Sharpen your stone. Sharpen your steel with the stone. Start writing. I can't write. Why don't you try it? Or is that really just a convenient excuse for you to be able to have plausible deniability? I'm really getting tired of patriots who yak and yak and yak, but don't do a damn thing. And if you're one of them, then I got to tell you, we got nothing further to discuss. I'm out here blowing my spout every day. Do you think I'm making friends in government doing this? Do you think I enjoy getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do this homework? The center cannot hold. The center cannot hold. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. And mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed. And everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity.